Good evening, and welcome back to the Church of the Broken Frog. I took last week off in order to map out a little more of where I would like to take this series. In the next couple weeks, we'll go on a bit more of a research-focused journey. For the time being, I'd like to read a passage from the book 500 Years of Resistance by Gord Hill. The passage I'll be reading is actually from the introduction written by Ward Churchill, a prominent First Nations activist who was involved in the Yellow Thunder occupation of Dakota by Dakota AIM in the Black Hills region. Noble Red Man. Throughout the Yellow Thunder occupation, those of us living in the hills maintained a continuous interaction with the Lakota living on the nearby Pine Ridge Reservation, especially with such elders as the traditional headsman and spiritual leader Frank Fools Crow and his assistant Matthew King, who'd been instrumental in guiding the actions of Dakota AIM since the period leading up to the 1973 siege at Wounded Knee. While each of them was endowed with a highly refined bitterness of wit, Matthew in particular was gifted with a natural flair for satire, wielding it like a surgeon's scalpel to deflate balloonfuls of Euro supremacist presumption. When signing official documents, for instance, he refused to inscribe anything other than Noble Red Man, telling anyone foolish enough to wonder that this was his pen name, assigned by a multitude of his self-anointed Great White Fathers. Whenever we were on the reservation, those of us from the Yellow Thunder stopped off as a matter of course at the homes of whichever elders we were nearest. Pine Ridge is a big place, so geography largely dictated who was visited on a given day, to perform whatever chores needed doing. One afternoon in late July 1982, several of us dropped in on Matthew on our way back to the encampment from a meeting with some young people in the reservation town of Kyle, and after fetching water for his horses and some other odds and ends, joined him under his arbor for the time-honored social ritual of sharing coffee, cigarettes, and conversation. At first, as we sat around swapping jokes and indulging what amounted to the AIM equivalent of gossip, there was little to distinguish the occasion from any number of others spent relaxing in the shade of the same or similar arbors, less still that it would mark itself indelibly upon my memory. Then Matthew cleared his throat, indicating that there was something serious he wished to say. He began by informing us that he didn't question, in fact admired, our courage. We caused him great sadness, though. This was, he said, because it was clear to him that no matter how fiercely we fought, and no matter how long and hard we struggled, no matter how much pain we were willing to endure, we'd been beaten before we started. Worst of all, he summed up, was that we'd, to all intents and purposes, beaten ourselves. Having thus captured our undivided attention, as he knew he would, Matthew went on to explain why this was so, framing the problem with a clarity and straightforward elegance that to the best of my ability is reconstructed here. Below is what Matthew King said. Anybody can see that you're filled with anger. Your anger is from the heart, and there's a reason for it. So you're right to be angry. Anybody who sees what's happening to our people should be angry about it. It's good that you feel the fire of anger burning in your bellies, because that's what gives you strength to do what you're doing. And what you're doing has to be done if the suffering of the people is ever going to end. But no anger, no matter how natural and necessary, is ever enough. It's true that it's made you into fighters and that fighters are needed. But you must always remember what you're fighting for, not just what you're fighting against. You understand what challenges have to be made in the way things are. That's why you've chosen to fight. But it's just as important to know what kind of changes you're going to bring about. That's where you're lost. You know pretty well what it is you're trying to get away from, or at least you think you do. But you've really no idea where you're trying to go, or how to get there, and that's why you're bound to lose. The old man sat quietly for a few moments, allowing time for what he had said to settle in before returning to his theme. Think of it as a journey. You want to go somewhere. To get there, you can't just head off. You have to ride in a particular direction. But in order to know what that direction is, you have to know where you are when you set out. And you have to know where you are all along the way, if you're going to be sure you haven't drifted off course. Otherwise, you might just ride forever and never get where you want to go. Chances are you'll end up riding around in circles. People ask me, King, what's the best way to know where you are? They expect me to tell them something about how the Lakota could always tell by the sun and the stars. And it's true that we know how to guide ourselves that way. But sometimes it's cloudy and you can't see the sun or the stars. So that's not the best way. What you do, and you boys know this as well as I do, you pass a landmark, a bluff, a big tree, something that sticks up. And then, when you're out there moving across the plains, every once in a while you look back over your shoulder to see where you are in relation to that point. That's the best way to make sure you never get lost. Often, it's the only way. So you see, to know how to get where you want to go, you have to first know where you are. And to know where you are, you have to know where you've been. You can't do without all three of these pieces. If you're missing any of them, you're going to be lost. He sat back again, lit a cigarette while studying our faces, then resumed. There are different kinds of journeys, and you boys have set out on one. You've got yourselves a big problem, though. You don't really know where it is you're trying to go. Not really, because someplace else isn't much of a destination. So you don't know which direction to take to get there. That's because you're not clear about where you are. Oh, you know, it's some place you don't like. But if I asked you to tell me why that is, you couldn't even do that very well. The reason all those things are true is because you don't know where you've been. What I'm saying is that, other than little dribs and drabs, maybe, you don't know your history. You don't really know where you're coming from. So you don't know how things were or how they got to be the way they are. That means you can't truly understand the situation you're in. Not even the real nature of who and what you think you're fighting against, since you don't really know your enemy. You can't see what must be done to defeat him or heal the pain he's caused. You're good boys. You mean well. You fight hard. But if you don't know your history, you're bound to just keep heading off in the wrong direction or riding around and around in circles. If you don't know your history, you'll always be beat before you start. I chose to read this passage tonight as a preamble to the research projects I'll be doing in future weeks. The reason for this is as stated. I don't know my history, and I know a lot of us out there also have the same problem. So, in coming weeks, I'll be trying to feature more stories on the black community's struggle for itself and any sort of intersectionality that can be found within the stories of others. Other communities just like ours, the Native American community, the Asian American community, the LGBTQ community. Social justice has always walked in lockstep with itself. Injustice anywhere is always injustice everywhere. I invite you to sit back and learn some things in the coming weeks. That's all I have for tonight. Thank you for listening, and thank you for your time. And remember, in the words of Matthew Mercer, don't forget to love each other. It is Wednesday, my dudes.